Assalamu alaikum and hello everybody. Sam Zabi here from Majan University College. Happy to see a good number of participants in the webinar. I would like to welcome our guest for today, Engineer Mohamed Al Ajmi from Petroleum Development Oman BDO. So enjoy your time with him and see you later.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you Ibtisam, and thank you Khalaf of Majan for giving me this opportunity in order to give one of the useful topic that is can be widely used by everyone, not necessarily to be oil and gas engineers. All the enthusiasts, all the inspirants, all the engineers who would like to get some knowledge tool that they can apply in their own life. They can apply indeed in their own discipline, in their own field. The whole idea is, of course, to take you through this topic, which is called a Pore-to-Tank, in order to take you through the decision gated step process that will help you in order to develop whatever opportunity you have. So it's an application in oil and gas business, but not necessarily you can apply it on oil and gas. Even if you have a low profile opportunity, your own dreams, your personal dreams, you can even apply the same approach and same technique in order to mature your project to make it happen. So my name is Mohamed Al Ajmi, as mentioned. I would like to take you through the application of one of the widely used techniques in oil and gas industry, which is an application for that. Let me start with asking you three questions. Number one is what? What is actually about? What is this process about? The process is actually a systematic approach. It's a decision-gated approach which helps us to mature opportunity from its initial identification phase to its project evacuation, to its project investment, final investment decision. So it's actually making a very consistent, effective, and efficient steps, which is, of course, helping us to fast track our opportunities after giving it appropriate ingredients, which help us to actually take it to execution. Why do we want to know that? Why this actually decision-gated approach is quite important in the industry or elsewhere? Because of course we are dealing with a large complexity of network, a lot of interdependencies, a lot of disciplines that are working together in order to achieve those dreams. So through these techniques, you will be able to get a lot of insights that is quite helpful for you to apply in your own field. How? Definitely my emphasis on this topic will not focus on the technical discipline related analysis. However, I'll take you through the process steps, how it looks like, what are the requirements in order to move through the decision-gated approach, and as well as what are the requirements of the technology that we need to embrace in order to help us to mature those projects, which is what we call them as an enablers for us to achieve those targets and goals. But before starting that, let's understand how actually oil and gas business, the whole story, through the application of oil and gas, through the application of this decision-gated approach, which I'm going to take you later to understand more about it. I would like you to understand about what are the elements, what are the phases of development for any project, for a subsurface project it goes through. Number one is an exploration phase, where definitely we look at a land, which is of course a surface land, which looks like a structural that has a certain feature. And then we drill, of course, our well, and we explore for hydrocarbon. If there is any, of course, potential, for sake of simplicity, I know not all of you belong to oil and gas business, not all of you are, of course, working in this field. But again, as a generic overview, imagine that there is a tank which is, of course, left at the depth, which is like 1 kilometer and so. So this tank, of course, has some opportunity, has some value. It has a hydrocarbon, which is, I guess, sellable, which is, of course, we are getting value at the end of the day. So this is actually a tank. We try to drill an exploration well to explore that hydrocarbon. This is what we call the exploration phase. So once actually we find that hydrocarbon there, that goes to the next step. And this step is basically we drill more wells in the structure to define our structure, to know actually the size of the price, how much hydrocarbon in place we have. That's what we call it as the, of course, as the appraisal phase. Then definitely we come up with the concept in order to develop that field. So based on what volume in place we have, how much is the volume in that tank? Imagine there is a tank and you have quantified that volume. Then we come to the next stage, how we can develop those volumes. They're going to be in phases, how many wells, and etc. And hence, once we plan, we come up with an integrated field development plan following a certain systematic approach that I'm going to mention about, I'm going to talk and emphasize on. It comes a production phase, where again, it's going to be you're producing your opportunity, you're getting value out of those opportunity by executing the projects. And then comes the stage abandonment, where you need to shut down all of your operations in the field, and by then you of course search for another. So this is actually a well approach, as I said, they're subdivided into phases, and later on I'm going to elaborate more on that front. As opportunity realization process, as we looked at in the previous slide, here is actually the much more details, but again, it's the same approach as mentioned earlier. Exploration phase followed by development, again, execution, and then followed by, of course, operation and operation excellence, and looking at the lifespan of this project, and we end to decommissioning of the field. When you look at the cash flow, those are for the financial and accountants who actually look into how the cash flow profile looks like. When you look at the spectrum of investment, we see that initially, definitely, you need to spend some money, some capital expenditure need to be there in order to drill your exploration without getting any value of that opportunity. That's actually for search of hydrocarbon, right? So you invest some money. So once, again, appraisal, you still go with the negative cash flow, as you can see here. And then later on, when you start developing this field, you start actually generating positive cash flow. Of course, as a net, you are creating some profit, even though you are, of course, spending to drill your wells, and along with that, the unveiling facilities that is, of course, required in order to develop those opportunities. And then, of course, it will end up to decommissioning of the field. This is as easy as steps as followed. So what is the decision-gated process? And why it is important? Is it only important for oil and gas business? Is it only the oil and gas, the upstream industry, or who can only use this process? Definitely no. This can be used by anyone. So as I told you, the takeaways of this session, I'm trying to emphasize, that's why this session is meant actually for everyone, not only for oil and gas enthusiasts, also for whoever belongs to non-technical fields as well. Because the approach is, of course, same. You can apply the same approach in a hybrid form. You can apply it any other places. Of course, whether it was a big size opportunity, small size opportunity, but steps are quite interesting for you in order to mature your project from its identification phase to its evacuation phase. So let's say, as I mentioned, it's an appraisal stage where we know very little about our fields. Then we move to the concept, we come up with a plan, we design, we come up with a definitive design of our projects, and we end up to definitely take it one step further. So as I mentioned, I can minimize this, okay? So yes, so basically there are a set of questions we need to ask ourselves. Number one, in order for us, if we have an opportunity, imagine that you have a dream. You want to buy a car, fine. If you want to buy a car, let's say Lamborghini or some expensive cars, right? You need to come up with a plan. You need to get rich, and those plans, you need to come up with a project. That project is going to be quite economic for you. And then you need, of course, definitely dream will always stay dream unless you have a clear roadmap, a clear plan to achieve it, as well as any opportunity in life. It's applicable also in oil and gas business as well. So in order for us to get the right ingredient of success, to take that opportunity from one step to another, to fast track that to execution, we need to get those ingredients. One of which is what is called integration. Definitely at different stage, we need integration to happen. As I mentioned, it's a decision-gated approach, which is subdivided into phases, which are bounded by the decision gates. And those decision gates, in order to cross them like a doors, they have, of course, certain criteria. And those criteria, what we call them as assumption criteria. For instance, we need to have certain scale of knowledge that will take us to step ahead. Those are the ingredients. We need, as I mentioned, we need integration among different disciplines to make this happen. Time, going to be, of course, time value. Of course, this should be bounded by timing. We need to be efficient and effective to deliver the project. The scalability, which means basically to what level of details we need to go in order to meet our decision objectives. Not necessarily to go with full-fledged development, whereas we need only few information to take right decision to take that project to execution. Risk, definitely, we know that the subsurface environment is like a black box. Imagine yourself, you are in the closed room and you know nothing about it. You can just sense by touching, and touching for us is like pressure. When we sense pressure, we sense production that comes on surface, but subsurface environment is quite complicated. So for us, it's appropriately, as we move forward in this funnel, we need to identify what are the uncertainties. And there is, of course, uncertainties there are many uncertainties because initially, at a very initial stage of field development, we know nothing about a field, or minimum. At least we drilled only one well, and that one well won't tell us a lot of information about our field. And then accordingly, once we come up with those risks, we need to manage those risks and come up with a contingency plan and a mitigation plan in order for us to mature the project. So these are the three ingredients, the attributes which are important for us to successfully mature this project through the decision-gated approach. As I mentioned, if this actually three elements, so three criteria, these ingredients are met, we can fast track those opportunity to execution directly. So it depends on the robustness of your project and how easy you can execute them. This is actually an important element you need to keep in your mind. Why? Remember, I asked you the second question. Why do we want that? Why the subsurface oil and gas industry is quite complicated? Those are actually the main elements we need to focus on. Because at the end of the day, you need to know that there are two different information we need to keep in our mind. Number one is stakeholder, which are shown on the right side, and there are objectives. We know that the overall objective of maturing any subsurface opportunity is to maximize recovery, because it's a mother nature. Allah gave us this opportunity. We are trying to produce them and generate value, which is of course cash flow, as a positive cash flow, as a profit. And for us to do that, definitely there are a couple of stakeholders who are involved, whether they were operators who are meant to execute those projects, partners who are of course the stakeholders, the investors who are interested to invest in oil and gas business, the legislators, the governments who actually own the land, who own actually this who owns actually this resource, financiers and purchasers. Of course, the market, we need to care about the market. What's the value of that opportunity? What's the value of hydrocarbon in the market? So how sellable it is. So all of that need to be properly identified. So each of those stakeholders, they have their own definitely objectives, and those individual objectives at the end of the day, they need to aggregate together in order to meet the final common objective, which is of course producing from this hydrocarbon, producing from this field, because each field are subdivided into projects, and those are the stakeholders of those projects. They have different objectives. However, we need to combine and integrate those objectives to meet the final desired end result, which is of course producing at the end of the day. So those are the elements: maximizing recovery, minimizing exposure, the contracting workflows, maximizing recovery as mentioned, reserves, and licensing as well, because this land will be awarded to someone in order to produce, in order to explore and accordingly produce from the field. Definitely, when we look at, because as I mentioned, why it is important, because of the challenges. So whenever in life you have challenges, you need to try to map those challenges and to identify those challenges, so you will be able to tackle them in future. So the reason being why this decision-gated approach has been quite important for the industry is because the projects are becoming larger. Now we have fields in like say in North Sea, there are very large fields. Even in like the Saudi Arabia, there are much larger fields. So we need to come up with, of course, an approach, a systematic approach that we can, of course, carry over each project, I mean, in a systematic way. And including that, of course, many of those industries, they are becoming much more diverse in time of their portfolio. How large is their portfolio is becoming. So there are multiple projects, different sizes. They have different type of projects. That's why it's becoming much more complex. So we need something to manage them. Increasing, of course, level of complexities, requirements for efficiency, because we know the current economic circumstances and the crisis. We need to manage with whatever we have. So, of course, the requirements for the AI solutions, for the EOR, enhanced for recovery, information of technology, all of that, of course, will help in order to utilize whatever we have and try to optimize as much as we can and maximize the recovery accordingly. Requirement for flexibility, which is of course utilizing whatever is available. For example, we are producing volume from subsurface to surface. We can utilize the surface facilities that are available. Can we maximize the use of existing facilities in order to invest in, of course, an extra phase of development? So this kind of thing, of course, made the reason why those decision-gated approach to be important. I'll give you a very simple example. This is, of course, this has been presented, one of the example to illustrate on that, to emphasize on this point. This was actually the study which has been done by E&I. So they were looking at what set of projects that they're going to undertake in the coming years. Definitely in the coming, let's say 10 years from now, the type of project is diverse, as you can see. So all of them, they are actually going to the declining trend. They are conventional projects, most of them, they are going to production declining. So the requirement, so the need for the AI technology, for artificial intelligence and information of things are becoming, of course, more kind of pronounced from 2020. And of course, the impact of pandemic and adapting ourselves to the new norm. All of that is, of course, becoming quite important for us. Utilize the data. So data is a new barrel. That's how we actually define how the industry is looking at it. Besides that, of course, there are new projects which are featuring, which is enhanced oil recovery, a new phase of development, and deep water complex projects they're coming into. They're featuring into our portfolios. The portfolio is becoming larger. The emphasis, the prioritization of project, whether which one to execute, arresting the decline of the existing fields with utilizing again the technology that we have, or that is actually evolving nowadays, to maximize the recovery of the field. So we can see how it is becoming quite important and pronounced with this example. This is also a retrospective example that we can see that of course, is one of the study that has been done, which actually says that there are almost 9 years ago, there are almost 200 FDPs, or field development plan, has been done. However, 99% of those projects did not meet the forecast requirements, which means, of course, delay in then project delivery. Along with that, look at the losses of 3 billion per year. So if you look at the cartoon, which is shown on the right, which shows there are two different bars. On the extreme left, which is the potential value of an asset, the potential value of this opportunity, and look at what actually did we achieve. So we have identified those are the reasons, the shortfalls. What are the reasons? Why did we actually not achieve? What is happening with those projects? Basically, remember I mentioned about the integration. So integration is one of the ingredients in order to fast track opportunities through the decision gated process. So not understanding reservoir. So there are a lot of lack of understanding between the disciplines about how things are connected to each other, subsurface environment, the dynamics, and the rest, so which actually created this problem. There are problems which are related to the evacuation of hydrocarbon at the well level, and even networking at surface, the pipelines, the development plan that is adapted, that are suboptimal. We did not design for instance, for the capacity that we are expecting to produce. So all of that is actually are linked to one of the important part I would like to mention, which is integration loss. Whenever we do the project, whenever you are of course planning to do something, you need to ensure all of those the value chain throughout the process line need to be connected to each other. We need to ensure the integration among the members, integration among the disciplines, and upon the directors in order to ensure the right delivery of the project at the given timeline. So this actually, when we ensure the integration, has been, of course, one of the key elements why the value of an opportunity are not, of course, as expected. So if we look at the development process, this is actually the study which has been done. It's a dated study which has been done by Shell Exploration and Production. Basically, one of the key highlights I would like to mention is, of course, the emphasis. There has always been an emphasis on integration. There are poor integration among an experience and knowledge through the expertise and experience because of the reasons of, again, because those disciplines were actually working on silo basis. But again, through those decision-gated process, those are quite managed by this decision-gated approach, by having a common objectives at each phase of the decision-gated approach to develop this project. So again, the point has always been highlighted, and it's actually improved nowadays to deliver the project on time. Once again, as I mentioned, that is structural approach. I would like now to take you through every element to emphasize on those ingredients, on those attributes, one by one. We'll start before that on how. So basically, the how question, my focus is going to be on technology requirements and how the process lines look like. So one of the great challenges that we face in oil and gas industry is basically about at reservoir level, which is of course the subsurface environment related to well itself, which is a connection between subsurface environment and the surface environment, and the operability. The reservoir, which is related to energy. Do we have an aquifer support? Do we have a pressure support? Do we have an energy to produce from that hydrocarbon? What level of complexity? What size of the price? All of that is, of course, going to be at very initial stages uncertain, which is, of course, as part of the uncertainties we need to tackle. The well producibility. Do we know that? Do we have enough energy for well to lift by itself, or do we need kind of lifting requirements for this well by adding some pumps? So pumps will lift that oil from the subsurface environment to surface. So that kind of, again, challenging part need to be addressed. Operability, it means of bottleneck in the system, any back pressures, because at the end of the day, the hydrocarbon will be produced from the pore to surface via those pipelines, and it will go directly to the tanks, and hence it will go to the export line. So these are the oil field challenges, especially I'm talking about whether it was or offshore fields or onshore fields. They face similar type of environment with, of course, with some differences if we go to the details, but that's not actually the objective. I'm going to take you through the overall process. The onshore development, how it looks like, how many actually wells, what well site we are trying to drill, horizontal, vertical, it depends on how my subsurface environment looks like, what type of development, accordingly I'm adapting, whether it's pattern, what 5-spot pattern, 9-spot pattern, what different shapes of pattern, 7-spot pattern. So that, of course, has an implication on the capital investment, because investors, at the end of the day, what they're going to be interested about. First, tell me what the size of the prize is, and tell me what are the cost requirements, how much I need to invest, and what are the value generation. So accordingly, once we know where I'm developing my field, whether it was onshore, offshore, accordingly, I know what's my capital investment and my capital expenditure, and accordingly, I'll define my phase. Accordingly, I'll allow the decision makers and the decision to take the right decision accordingly and invest. And when you look at the gated decision development process, as I mentioned, as the field life cycle moves on from its appraisal and concept and designing, which is much more definition of the project and execution, look at the impact of risk and investment, how it looks like. So basically the risk, it gets lower because with time, appraisal, initially we know very few information, right? So with time we acquire more data. More data means, of course, we are adding more knowledge, and of course, and that will be associated with the cost because we invest in data acquisition. So in order to define the project, right? So we have the multiple concepts, we define what project actually work for us. That's what comes the role of the front end engineering design, because as you know that most of the investment is actually on surface facilities, so it costs more than double of the wells itself. So it's very important to get the right information. So it's not to gather everything you want, get what is necessary information and data is required in order to take decision and move in the funnel. So that kind of a proper identification of required information will be definitely identified as we move in the funnel. So of course, accordingly, you're going to converge to the final development concept that I would like to apply. Of course, the level of knowledge, more knowledge from left to right, you will have more data, more knowledge, more information, and your risk, of course, going to get lower. You cannot get rid of all of the risk because that will come at the cost, because you will not invest for something that you don't need it now. But if it's manageable, then that's more than enough. We don't really go and we put everything, all the risk to zero. It cannot be. That's not because again, the subsurface environment will always stay uncertain. The mother nature is uncertain. So we are trying to minimize uncertainty as we move in this funnel from the appraisal, concept, design, and execution. This is actually showing how the risk actually looks like, how the funnel of risk looks like. Initially, when we know nothing, the risk going to be high, the spread going to be high. So in the concept, definitely we acquire more information because at appraisal stage, we identify, we do opportunity framing, and we know what we have so far, and accordingly, we identify data gaps and acquire information that will help us to select the right, to move, of course, between the decision gate between the appraisal and concept, and then between the concept and design. So along that, we acquire more data, and of course, this funnel is going to be narrower, but it will not get to zero, definitely. We're going to, of course, carry those uncertainties. We manage them as we move forward, and we come up with the mitigation strategy. So investors, at the end of the day, before actually final investment decision, what they will be, of course, interested about is to get the right information. They want to know what the size of the prize is. At the same time, they want to know what are the uncertainties. Do we have the mitigation strategy in order to avoid them from happening, or any kind of plan B? So these are what they're going to be interested about. So the risk management is also very important. As I told you, we move in this funnel. So again, the gated decision approach in oil and gas industry, I would like to take you through one by one. Let's talk about the integration across disciplines and what the value of time at the same time. So requirement of across disciplines integration, along with that is over time. So if you can see, if we define a development plan, there is definitely a recovery strategy for us, right? So we need to come up in development plan, what is the recovery strategy? What type of wells we want to drill? What type of completion? Is it vertical, horizontal well? How many wells we want to drill? What facilities we need to, of course, put on surface in order to evacuate that crude from the wells to tank? So these need to be, of course, properly identified. Forecast as well. We need to look at what are our forecasts. Did we look at the ranges, the low and high and base cases? Are our risks manageable or not? Secure legislative and finance approvals, and all of that need to be, of course, we do something called TCOP analysis, technical, economical, commercial, and organizational and political analysis. We ensure that from all perspectives, whether it was related technical analysis, evaluation we do in order to know this, the quantification of how much we have, how much value we have, and along with that, what does it have a commercial value? Is it economic to run it? Can we invest in that project? It has economic, does it generate profit or not? All of that will be, of course, evaluated accordingly. Those are all, of course, in the risk part. So we need to come up with a probabilistic scenario that we manage all of those uncertainties as we move forward. What are the type of technical evaluation? Remember, as I mentioned, TCOP, keep in mind, TCOP, technical, economical, commercial, organizational, and political. So the part of the technical evaluation we do, of course, related to reservoir characterization. That tank, which is of course put in subsurface, need to know what structure type we have, how much volume we have in place, and what properties. The properties would define how much is your volume there. How much we can recover. That's actually the job of me as reservoir engineers, to know what are driving our production, what are the driving force of production to surface. That's what I'm actually important about. And of course, about the completion requirements. What do we need? Do we need to put pump in the wells? We don't need to put some pump. What are the forecasting? How much volume, how much oil we're going to produce? I know most of you, at the end of the day, when they look at the newspaper, how much Oman is producing every day, for instance. This is what we are actually about. So this actually, every reservoir engineer is actually, he aggregates for his own fields, and then the company does, and all the companies does, they aggregate it to come up with the production forecast or what actually we are producing every day. And what equipment's needed, because we cannot, yes, we have volume under the ground. We do have at the same time our wells, we know how much we are producing, but we need something at surface. How can we see that oil on tank? So we need pipes, we need pumps, we need compressors, we need separators. All of that are, of course, required. So all of the technical analysis. So look at how many people, how many stakeholders are involved, how we need to combine them. They cannot actually work on silo basis. Otherwise, of course, the project won't be robust. The project will be suboptimal. And there are, of course, operations, the people who operate all the facilities on ground, the economists. They look at the lifespan of those projects, of the equipment. They look at, is it economically feasible to run it, to facilitate, or we need to stop, actually, we need to decommission the field. All of that decision also. So it's not only subsurface, it's everyone that are working as an integrated team to make this happen, to fast track this opportunity to evacuation. So as I mentioned, it's a complex interaction. That's why, but it's not necessarily that this approach is only applied for the complex opportunities. You can apply even with the small size opportunities in your own life. It's personal. So you can always come up with those. We can come up with a hybrid plan, the hybrid approach that can, of course, be analogy to this. As I mentioned, from the exploration stage, production and development and production, all of those subsurface disciplines are involved. So now I'm actually appointing to people who are interested to enter this field. Those are the graduates, those are the new intakes, which actually come up with a fresh mind. They can, of course, put a lot of insight on this, can, of course, add up a lot of, come up with the new methodologies and technologies with the fresh mind, the data science, which can, of course, utilize available opportunities and maximize the recovery out of them. There are economists, there are production engineers, there are reservoir engineers, there are drilling. So all of those subsurface team, petrophysicists who look at the properties of the reservoirs, and everyone, they all work as an integrated team. However, if one of them just is focusing on his own discipline on silo basis, even though he will come up with a much more crisp image on that specific subject, however, it might be irrelevant to the whole approach to the decision that is required in order to move that opportunity in the final. So we need to really be a teamwork, a common goal for us to achieve, even though we have different, remember, we have different objectives, but that objective, they need to serve the bigger objective, which is meeting the desired final end results by maturing those volumes. Look at this. Look what happens if they are working on silo basis. Production modeling, for instance. The very simple question, as reservoir engineers, for me, as subsurface reservoir engineer, if I say that I don't have aquifer means I don't have enough pressure support that will drive my production to surface. how that piece of information would be helpful for a person who is working as concept engineer at surface. If there is no proper integration, definitely there might be a bottleneck in the surface system, because let's say because of this miscommunication, we know we did the right exercise, they did the right exercise. If we don't actually communicate right together and try to basically get the right information, of course, we might end up having inconsistency in our design, which is of course the big chunk of investment that the investor will put his money on. Definitely will be either downsized, suboptimal, because we did not encounter for an expansion of this project. So this kind of thing need to be, of course, properly undersizing, oversizing of opportunity of course of facility design happens because of, again, misconduct, miscommunication among the disciplines, because they are working on silo basis. So we need to ensure that kind of surface, subsurface, with our legal team, with our economists, all of them, we need to work as an integrated work in order to deliver this project and take it one step ahead. This also in your life, when you put your project with your team, make sure that all of those value chain steps actually happen as an integrated team for you to mature the project. Make sure everyone is connected, everyone is talking to each other, then you can easily mature this project. In the oil and gas industry, they started 3 different operating models. So basically, initially, how the industry actually worked, every discipline actually was working on the silo basis. Like we have reservoir engineering discipline, they were working with their own team, with own disciplines. And of course, it has its own drawbacks, because it will be, yes, technically focused on certain subject, reservoir engineering aspects, for instance, it's an example. You will not, of course, you will end up having opportunity, but you don't actually focus on the bigger, it will be irrelevant to the objective in order to move the decision-gated approach. You will do a much more detailed work, more resolution in certain aspect, which is not required. You will waste, of course, time at the end of the day, and unnecessarily you will, of course, add cost on it. Maybe you might take time as well as cost. You might run some hi-fi fancy tools in order to get information or data acquire. So that, of course, will be a bigger drawback. So it actually doesn't work quite a lot with the industry. Then there is, of course, an asset team. Asset team, basically all of this team as subsurface, as production engineers, as a geologist, they work together in order to deliver the message. And here, of course, there's of course its own drawback, which is the disciplines, by each discipline themselves, they don't get actually connected to their own functions. So lack of connectivity between the function discipline, the experts, the expertise, and the asset team who are working on the execution of those projects, which are the opportunities. And there is, of course, a newly adopted approach, which is actually working and quite efficient in most of the oil and gas operator, which is called the hybrid approach, where they have both of them. They have the function discipline, which of course they are connected to the asset team. So whenever support required to help the specific team, the specific discipline, the function team will always step in order to support the disciplines to, of course, to take these opportunities because at the end of the day, all of those opportunities will stand in the portfolio of the organization. They need to deal with, by all means, they need to undertake. So hybrid team is working, everyone is involved, expert teams, the assets, they are delivering the objectives as a whole. Integration in time. This is a very important illustration of how the life of the asset is important. Sometimes what happens is focusing on the objectives, focusing on the decision-gated objectives that has been identified by the decision makers. Usually happens that we focus on the project on that specific time. However, when we look at the project lifespan, for instance, let's imagine that we have a field and this field need to be produced. We can produce for 20 years. However, the facilities that we put in place, that lifespan of that facility is only 10 years. So that means, of course, the drawbacks is we cannot, of course, develop. We need to install another field. That cost going to be, we're going to ask on the capital expenditure of the field. So the time factor, whenever we think about developing a certain field, we need to take into consideration about the lifespan of this project, and accordingly put what development options that are possible in order to develop that time span, which has been highlighted. So the robustness, the integration in time as well is important, not among the discipline itself only, also in time as well. The technical integration, as I mentioned earlier, look at this, the process engineer at surface, subsurface engineers, and there are production economists that evaluate whether it's economic. Remember the TCOP, put in your mind, the technical, economic, commercial, organizational, political, those analysis should be done by those various disciplines in order to ensure the consistent delivery and the fast moving of this opportunity to execution. So all of them, reservoir model, with the well model, with the facility model, all of them, they are interconnected in order to have a better picture of how can we mature. That's an application, as I mentioned, it's an application in oil and gas business. So look at this. Imagine if everyone, earlier what happened actually in early life in the development of fields, all of them, each discipline, we had only discipline-based softwares, like engineers software, like reservoir engineers, they had their own models, production engineers, they had their own models, facilities, they had own models, but it was very difficult earlier on to integrate among the disciplines. They were only Excel sheet, we put together and try to integrate the information. But now with the technological solution, we have something called integrated asset model. What does it mean is basically now all of those models, all those silo models, they are now connected to each other, which means now we have a software number X is connected to software number Y, and we can just come up with an integrated shape where we can, of course, to focus, which enables us to focus on the bigger objective of maximizing recovery. So we have we have models per discipline we can integrate to get a better picture. It's a better technical model, integrated asset model we call it. So look at how it was initially, it was discrete, and now how it is connected. Again, it's the same thing. So it's an integrated model, which means looking at geoscientists, drilling, reservoir modeling, process, all of them, they're connected. The economists, all of them, they're connected, all disciplines. And by the end of the day, the final design and result is maximizing the recovery out of this field, maximizing the value of asset, the value of opportunity or resource that the company or the local government or the country has. Let's move to the next step. Remember, we are just focusing about the ingredients. The ingredients, those are the catalysts that help us to successfully fast track the opportunities using this decision gated approach. Remember, because we need them. The scalability. The scalability means, indeed, we know that we don't want to do something unnecessarily, right? That's a key message. We do have objectives. Let's say to move from appraisal to concept, we identify, we need to know, of course, per discipline, certain questions. We address certain questions, and we are hoping to answer those questions. And scalability means we analyze to match our objectives that has been set. We don't do something that is unnecessary. So that is what we call do something that is fit for purpose, which allows us to mature this opportunity. You will save time, and you will save at the same time the cost which is associated with acquiring unnecessary data. So we do something that is fit for purpose, that is scalable with the objective, with the what we call sanction criteria that has been identified by the decision maker. So look at this. The approach is quite simple. Initially, at the appraisal stage, we know very little about our structure. We know very little about our reservoir. We just have one well, and that is very limited to a certain well. And the field is considered as green. We know nothing. So in this case, the amount of the granularity, I mean, the amount of details is required at appraisal stage is quite minimal. We don't want to do, let's say, 3D model, integrated numerical model in order to shape, to know, which is of course consists of 3 million cells or 300 million cells, because from the doability perspective, it's doable. But does it give us more insight? No, of course, that won't give us more insight about our opportunity. So the decision-gated approach, what actually it does, it addresses the right question to be asked in order to scale our analysis to the requirements. We don't do something that is unnecessary. So in the concept, we need more granularity. We need more kind of details. And then we go to the design phase, definitely, because a huge investment is about to happen. We need to get much more information. The details, the pipings, and everything should be scaled to a certain level, which is enough for us to move through that decision gate. And of course, evacuation, it follows. So through this funnel, it's very important to scale the data required, the analysis required with the of course the objective of that decision gate. This is a very simple analogy. If you go to the doctor, and this doctor will ask you if you have some problem. Just imagine if you have a head pain, and that head pain because you fell down, right? Because you had an impact and you fell down, and then the doctor will definitely want go to acquire or an advanced data, which is on the left, which is actually an X-ray image of a human skull. And as you can see here, that this, of course, level of detail is enough to identify if there is a crack on head, right? And it's cheaper solution for the doctor. If he identified there's a crack in his head, in this case, of course, the problem is diagnosed. But let's imagine if you have a headache and that has been continuously with you for a matter of months and so. In this case, of course, the doctor will go with a more kind of advanced solution, more detailed analysis, which is costly and takes time at the same time to, of course, to identify that problem. So that would actually, I'm trying to put things together. If it is required, if it's scalable to the decision that will be made to fast track this opportunity, then we do it. Elsewhere, we shouldn't do that. So it's, of course, it's a great analogy to what happens in the subsurface and petroleum industry. So we started with a simple volumetric model, which is called a material balance, which is actually as a function of pressure and volume. We don't need to have that level of details. It doesn't tell us about what are the, about the dynamics of the flow, where they are moving, how much they are moving, and all of that. It doesn't tell. We start very simple, right? If that is enough, that answers a certain decision questions, then okay, it's fine for us. If we need more kind of a detailed analysis, whether we need to know how many wells and what type of recoveries do we have a support, then we of course go through this what we call spectrum. We go higher and higher and higher to have much more details analysis, more kind of, again, we go with the black oil models, dynamic simulator, we go to the dual porosity models, EOR extension, composition model, and the rest. So we try to scale our data analysis to the requirements. We don't do something unnecessary. That's why, because everything comes at cost, and our job at the end of the day is to build, to mature that project efficiently and effectively. We don't do something that is unnecessary. This is actually a simple workflow that the multi-scale workflow happens throughout the journey, from its project identification at the appraisal stage to the project definition. So sometimes what we do, right, we run all the full-fledged model. However, we don't need to run a very, we don't want to keep our model as a repository for the data. Put everything, just dump in, because that will make our model heavier. It's very important that you realize you scale the problem. If you have a certain problem, try to scale it, get the right scale, try to extract that sub-model from the big model, and trying to understand the concept, and that concept reapplied again to the full-fledged model. So it's very important to set your objective initially, to identify what you have, what you want to answer, what the questions that you're trying to address at certain decision gates, and then accordingly run your models and analysis. The scalability is quite important. So this is actually, as I mentioned, remember the whole approach is becoming now decision-driven integrated modeling. It's not anymore just an approach and something you do it unnecessarily. You come up opportunity statement. For example, you have opportunity statement, for instance, for you personally, you want to buy a house, and this house you want to buy it, but okay, what type of house you are, how much budget you have. So you frame your opportunity first of all. What type of house, what's your budget, where you want to, when you want to build, and all of those questions. So framing session is quite important. What data you have that will help you in order to answer those questions. And then with time, definitely you might spend some money and answer certain questions, and that is buying a land and etc., etc. So you're becoming from course to find an appropriate full field scale, which will help you to answer certain questions. That actually how it works, the workflow. The static analysis we do, the dynamic analysis we do on the simulator, looking at the well-related scale modeling, HSF, all of that, it comes at the appropriate scale. And last ingredient that will help us to take this opportunity, which is of course the risk identification and coming up with the what we call the mitigation strategy. This is what type of risks we are having. Definitely it's applied to all disciplines and all stakeholders which are involved in this maturation process. We have CAPEX related, OPEX related management, and those are definitely the capital investment and OPEX operating costs that we make, right? Because at the end of the day, to mature it, it comes at cost. So do we have enough budget to mature that? Those questions we need to answer at the end of the day. Project finance and funding, who are the investors, who are involved, what's the price? Did we manage our risk? What the economic risk, macro and micro? We look into them. Risk identification, and that's related to technical risk, to the discipline related risk, subsurface engineers with surface engineers, and organizational framework, which really related to the construction plans and the completion and coordination, organization, contractual issues, because sometimes we need, of course, a service company who actually does the work for us. So we need to have kind of organizational framework in order to manage all of the workflows among the partners. So risk type, mainly this I'm going to focus on reservoir engineering related, which is a subsurface risks. As you can see, so first of all, when it comes to characterization of your reservoir and identification of size of price of volume of a subsurface reservoir, of course, this is a seismic section, which means basically how a subsurface environment looks like, a cross section, a 2D cross section. And this is like a well which has been drilled here. So initially, a project preparation, and we come up with a modeling of uncertainty. We come up with a fine modeling, and then we do a volume quantification. STOIP means here stock tank oil initial in place. It's a volume, how much oil we have under the ground. And this tornado shape, the tornado chart you see here, it's an uncertainty map. It's an uncertainty table. Tells us what is the most uncertain parameter that is driving my volume. Because as we move forward, in order to have much more confidence, we need to try to minimize those uncertainty, manage as much as possible. We need to make sure is that parameters, it has a big influence on our decision. Like say, okay, if that parameter is saying, okay, it's giving us a large uncertainty in volume that we have, then we need to find something. We need to acquire data. We need to identify what are the data gaps and accordingly come up with a data acquisition plan and try to minimize, to have more confidence on how much we have under the ground in order to plan for facilities and hence develop. So if we have a robust subsurface plan, we can come up with a multiple realizations. So if we have multiple realizations, we can come up with a multiple development scheme, right? So as you know that, as I mentioned earlier, that the surface development scheme is quite expensive. It's more than double of whatever the cost of the wells for a certain development. So if we come up with a set of realizations, we can come up with a set of development schemes. For instance, if let's say our expectation is to get the smaller volume initially, then we don't want to go and try to invest, let's say, $1 billion in order to put the full facility. We can go on the phase approach. The phases approach means whenever we realize whatever, let's initially we realize a smaller volume, and later on with having more data, more kind of resolution on our or understanding on our volumes, then we try to put phase 2 and phase 3, and that of course will save you a lot of money instead of going at once and put everything and design everything on your high case realization. Then in that case you might lose. Your opportunity might be suboptimal, and then you will lose. Of course, there will be a lot of allergen in the system, and you will pay a lot of money. That's going to be as sunk in the cost. So that's quite important on realizing how much volume in place you have and how you can manage your subsurface realization, and accordingly you come up with the optimal development plan, whether it was a full-fledged or it was phase development. This is an implication of risk. Usually, let's say based on subsurface understanding, how much energy. Aquifer means energy. So on the y-axis toward left, aquifer means how much water support we have. If there's no aquifer, which means we need a pump in order to produce, we don't have enough energy to produce. If we have an active aquifer, then we need to definitely, the well can flow by itself. So look at it, how it definitely, those decisions are depending on what risk is of course expected. So we kind put those ranges, whether it was aquifer related, do we have enough energy, we don't have enough energy, we can scale up what are the range of uncertainty and accordingly come up with a plan and come up with a base plan. So this is a very important aspect, the implication of risk. Look at this, the decision always comes, the decision support after looking at all of the aspects. So how the production looks like, definitely we look at, so how confident we know, how much we know about the field. And sometimes we need to rely, if we know little about the field, we can rely on equivalent subsurface nature fields which are producing from same reservoirs. And that gives us much more confidence to move forward. So by then your risk is going to be scalable risks. And accordingly, you come up with a mitigation strategy, which has been implemented in the fields which look similar to the existing fields that you're working on. So this kind of scalability is quite important to come up with the right decision. So as I mentioned, these are the 3 ingredients which help you to fast track the opportunity to execution, as I mentioned. So now the efficiency in science and process. As I mentioned, it's not necessarily you go at every steps in much more details unless it is necessary. So let's imagine that you want to build a house that looks similar to the houses which has been built in your area. In this case, you don't need to look at what specific material and exact material. You don't spend time to survey what actually works and what doesn't work, because you know you want to build a house which looks similar to one which is next door, and you know what are the ingredients and material. You can just seek help, and that's what we call it as using the data from analog. So if you can, if the opportunities, if you can standardize the whole technique, the whole approach, if you can standardize it, you can easily move through this funnel, and you can easily fast track those opportunities to execution. Because a company now, what they are working on is, if we know enough, we don't need to do something from scratch. We can utilize that piece of information and build on top of it. And that's why we follow decision-based approach, and we do something that is called fit for purpose. So integration is important. So integration in time, integration in size, integration among disciplines, fast tracking those opportunities. If we know data, we need to combine them together. And probabilistic approach, which means coming up with the ranges of scenario, which makes the decision makers, which help the investors to be much more confident to invest in those projects. They know what are the range of expectations. Okay, for them, I'm confident to invest because it's the full range of what I'm expecting to get. And production management at the end of the day, because it's a very important key, managing what, because because this is a planning perspective, integration, fast tracking, it's a planning part, but the evacuation part, realizing it, managing them, maximizing the opportunity, and of course looking at the key enablers, the technology which help us in order to mature those projects. Because now currently how the industry is working on is they are working on maximizing the value of existing asset by using data. Data is a new barrel. How can we optimize the well which are suboptimal? So these are quite important. The continuity of knowledge. This is a very important element I would like to emphasize on. Remember, we had an exploration phase of development. Exploration, then it goes to appraisal, then it goes to development, and then we develop properly our fields. In exploration phase, they are very good at coming up, identifying opportunities and large size prospects on regional basis. So once usually those projects, they generate a lot of opportunities. So once those projects, they get handed over to the development team, to an asset, then things becomes actually slowed down. And they, of course, going to focus on the another field. So we need to ensure that when those projects are handed over from exploration to the development field, there is kind of a continuity of knowledge. They need to support those the asset team to mature those projects and get them and monitor them and understand them as they move forward, throughout the plan. So we should have that continuity. That continuity is necessarily need to be there in order to ensure that everything works and everything works to serve the bigger objective of maximizing the recovery at the end of the day. So the development, if in appraisal phase, if you have a good kind of knowledge, good kind of connectivity in knowledge, you can see those lines actually how it goes up. And if you don't have that continuity thing, then of course you're going to be poor planning, and hence of course that will imply as a result eventually you get poor producibility from this field. Going deep and fast, this is of course, which means standardizing approach. The E&I, they did this survey to identify opportunities by utilizing and fast tracking their project to execution. If we know more, as I mentioned, if we know about our fields, we don't need to spend. If you want to know, if you know that you want to build the same house as your colleague, as your friend, then you need to try to seek help from them, and of course use the data that is in hand available on you, and only invest in something that you don't know in order to of course reshape your opportunity and of course to fast track it. So that of course approach has been followed now by the industry in order to move the project in their portfolio and try to mature them as fast as they can. So requirement for technology, as I mentioned, it's about getting the right size of the model is required that is appropriate for you to understand the subsurface, to mimic the reality, that's to mimic the physics that mimic the reality, what happens, which will help you in order to take the right decision. How many wells plus how much volume and plus the phases of development. Appropriate complexity, we don't need to be much more complex. We don't need to focus per discipline. We should work as an integrated team to ensure that the project gets matured, and finally get an integrated FTP that is again robust, that can be applied, of course, with as low as cost as possible. Because at the end of the day, the approach most of the organizations are following now is produce more with less. So we need to come up with a competitive scoping approach by planning as much as development project together in order to minimize overall project cost. So that is kind of optimization on cost, optimization on acquisition plan, optimization on recovery mechanisms of how many wells, what well types, and how much we need in order to produce. And plus so these are the important things. So all of that need to be there. So integrated modeling, the proper evaluation, probabilistic workflows, all of those uncertainties it's helping us once it's incorporated in our model to scale our opportunity, and then accordingly take them to appropriately to execution. So efficiency is important, as I mentioned. In order to get efficient plan, it's same again, the understanding of what are the drive mechanisms, and because those drive mechanism earlier you might produce by depletion, utilizing energy available, then you might put other projects, and all of that of course need to be scalable, and of course looking at physics should answer that, and do it at appropriate fit for purpose scale, numerical scale. So just to summarize what I was trying to say, that's why I said this is not only applicable to engineers, and you can play a very important role. Remember, you are a very important part of this equation. You are a very important part of this ingredient of success that will allow all the opportunity, whether it was personal or related to a discipline or field, you can apply. So to summarize, those are decision-making process. That's the decision-gated process. Start from appraisal, concept, design, and execution. And those are the ingredients, as I mentioned: integration, scalability, risk, fast tracking. If you have them, you can fast track this opportunity to execution. And planning is a very important part of this equation. Along with that, of course, the operational excellence and taking into consideration the time as a factor. So one of the key factors when designing your facilities, when looking at all of those elements of the value chain. So that's actually the end of my session. So I would like to hand over this to Ibtisam just to take us through some questions and look at the questions. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Hello again. Big thanks for Engineer Mohamed Al Ajmi for this presentation. Our audience, thank you for your time and interest. And don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts, Twitter and Instagram. Stay safe and good night.
I think I have a couple of questions. Can I just select some random questions and try to answer them? Hello, can all of you hear me? Hello?
Yes, Mohammed, go ahead.
Yes, so I'll select just a few questions to answer them randomly. So let me think. So I'll try my best to answer all of your questions, hopefully. But of course, I won't be able to answer all of you, but I'll make sure that I'll answer as much as I can. So let's start with this question. Is the question which is asked by Moz Al-Blushi. Is there any relationship between the amount of reserves and uncertainty and risk? Of course, there is no direct relationship between the amount of reserves and uncertainty, because it depends on the nature of the environment, the subsurface environment we have. So reserves is actually how much hydrocarbon we have, and those oil are of course traps in different structures, and they have different complexity. You might have, for instance, like Saudi Arabia, they have much higher reserves, but their uncertainties is not that huge, because most of their reserves are accumulated in one big reservoir in Reservoir field. So it's not necessarily that uncertainty is related directly to amount of reserve that that let's say a country has or a land has. So it's really related to geological complexity that has built through the geological time. So so you might have also a scenario where you have a very large uncertainty, but you have a large amount of reserves, and vice versa. You might have even larger amount of uncertainty, but of course a low amount of reserves. So it's not actually related. There's no relationship between the uncertainty and risk and amount of reserves. I hope I answered your question. Okay, people are asking to share the presentation in the slide pack, and hopefully we'll manage that with the team, and hopefully we'll send you the materials. Mu'tasim Al-Awfi. What is the name of software that connects the job of all the asset team needs? Definitely they are, as I mentioned, now through those softwares, you might have Schlumberger-based softwares. You might have, this is again a specific question he's asking. You might have because at the end of the day, those software now, the solution they have, that you can export in different formats that you want, and accordingly you can, of course, you can mingle or you can marriage those projects together in order to get certain model. You can just put them like a well model, you can connect it to the field model, and you can connect all sort of data. That's possible because now most of the software, they have the export capabilities where you can export it at different formats which is required. I'm looking for, please share the presentation. Okay, start Mafisa. Okay, Cash. Okay, there's a question by Mu'tasim Al-Awfi again. I think I answered this question. CAPEX. I'm trying to get the kind of variety of questions. Yeah, so there's a question which is asked by again, most of the questions by Mu'tasim. No problem, I'll take this question. Does not having an aquifer below the reservoir is bad? Water coning? Okay, this is again a specific question. I hope I'll try to use a slide if there is something that can show it. I feel this one, okay, this one. So just to answer this question actually, so if you look at a reservoir itself, of course it has an oil bearing, and on bottom of it, because of again because of gravity and the gravity effect, the oil usually it's lighter than oil, but it depends on type of oil, definitely. So usually what happens is oil, there's a water, it depends on the type of hydrocarbon that exists in your reservoir. If you have, for instance, a hydrocarbon like oil, it's good to have water aquifer in order to support the pressure, right? Because every pore that you are producing will be replaced by one pore if you have a perfect displacement, but that's not always the case, and that's not always 100%. But in case of gas, for instance, because gas is a non-wetting phase, right? So gas is not sticking to the rock surfaces, which means in this case, aquifer actually will play negative. So it's a diverse impact. If you have only gas, which is filling, which is again your hydrocarbon is gas, then it's bad to have an aquifer. It's better to have kind of only a tank model, tank reservoir only. It has a dry gas. Your recovery going to be, of course, better. It's bad for oil. It's good for oil, but it's bad for gas. Again, those are specific technical questions. It's not focused because I'm afraid that. Okay, this is a very interesting question which is asked by Sarmad Khan. So Sarmad Khan, he's asking a question which is, what if reserves deplete in the upcoming years? I'll give you a very important note that will help you to understand how the resources are quantified across the nations and every country. How do they quantify the reserves? Usually, look at the funnel. I'll take you through this funnel because it's a very interesting topic, very interesting thing. The question, I believe. If you look at, let me try to put this slide. It's a very nice question. Thank you for your question. There's a very good slide to tell you through. This one, yeah. So Sarmad Khan, if you look at this, this is again opportunity realization process for a subsurface project. When I mean subsurface project, you have a volume there and sitting on the ground, hydrocarbon, and trying to develop. So usually what happens, what goes in from the left, because here how it starts, you're exploring your field, right? So you explore and then it goes through the funnel, it gets produced at the end of the day, executed, fine. So what happens is we calculate a ratio, reserve replacement ratio. And that reserve replacement ratio, when a country, they admit that, they say we have this amount of reserves, let's say a million of reserves, I have 1 million, just for sake of number, for sake of argument, for number. So when I say I have a country says I have a reserve of 1 million, it basically means that I am actually producing, from the opportunities I have, from the project I have. At the same time, the explorers, they're adding volume on the other hand. So by then, kind of a steady state. Whatever you have produced has been replaced by a volume. By then, you maintain your reserves. So when there comes a time where there is a very few exploration in the field, then of course you're going to deplete your reserves. But definitely the nations, the countries, and the firms and organizations are working quite hard in order to identify those projects, to come up with those projects and add into this opportunity funnel. So by the end of the day, those whatever reserve that has been communicated with us is actually maintained. I hope I answered your question. There's one last question I'll take. I'll try to park those technical questions. I'll be able, of course, I'll try to answer all of the questions, hopefully, but I'll take some which is directly related to this. You're most welcome, Sunil. Yeah, it's a good question. This is asked by Khalil Saeed. This is the last question I would like to take, which is about what's the meaning of CAPEX and OPEX. CAPEX means the capital cost, the capital expenditure. The capital expenditure, it means the capital expenditure. The OPEX is, again, the operational expenditure. The capital expenditure, it's like, for instance, when you, like you have a car. When you purchase a car, that's actually a capital expenditure. So when you drill a well, how many wells you drill, how much facilities you want, that's a capital expenditure. But the operating cost, like say you, for your car, you pay a maintenance cost, you repair your, for instance, you service your car, you change your oil, all of that is actually related to OPEX. That's operational cost. So these two elements actually is quite important when it comes to budget identification and quantification. Maybe, okay. I think there are some specific questions I want to actually try to. Okay, so thank you everyone for making this happen and for attending. And I hope this session was helpful for you. And if you have any specific question, please put it down here in the question section, and inshallah I'll be able to answer all of you. And please contribute to the survey that will be circulated after this session. Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you very much.